Welcome back to the Take Human Action PA podcast. We're on episode 19. Thanks everyone for listening in. So yeah, we've got a very exciting guest today. We've got 3 endorsed candidates for the Mises Caucus now in Pennsylvania, all state rep candidates so far. So we're going to try to cover all of them. We're expecting more later on. For now, we've got one that we're bringing on. So tonight we'll have our guest, and then Sunday at 8 o'clock, we're going to have another endorsed candidate by the Mises Caucus for state rep in Pennsylvania. Anna Pangea is also one of our organizers. So that should be a good time. It'll be a special Sunday night broadcast. We'll be hitting episode 20. We're also going to be looking for some new hosts to run the podcast. We've got a couple of people who are going to be taking a break for a little while, so we're going to be looking for new people for that. There's already a few ideas, but I won't name drop just yet. We'll wait and see what happens with that. So on that note, I'll bring our guest. He's from a side of the state that we don't often talk about, up in the Northwest, out of Erie, Pennsylvania. He's a former TSA agent, current Intelligence Analyst, and Mises Caucus endorsed candidate for state representative. Let's bring on Michael Thomas. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
Excited to be here.
So I gave my brief intro, but why don't you give an introduction for yourself? You can just say like what you're running for, and then like how you got started in the liberty space. Like what did you do early on, and like what started to turn you to the ideas of liberty?
Okay. I came to Erie in 2002. Well, before that, I was very constitutionalist, very skeptical of government authority, etc. After 9/11, I came to Erie to join the TSA. I was with the first group of federal screeners to take over screening at Tom Ridge Field here in Erie. And after a few years of that, I went back to school. I got my bachelor's in intelligence studies and my master's in organizational leadership. And I went to work for the private sector. I had my fill of government dysfunction. So I spent the next 12 years basically protecting transportation and energy infrastructure as an intelligence analyst. 2020 with COVID, my company laid off a big chunk of my division. I was one of them. I've taken some side work, contract work for doing analysis for other companies, and I've also had some work, been working outside my field. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary as a security officer at our local casino.
Oh, that's definitely a very varied background. So let's dig into that a little bit more. So, how long were you a TSA agent?
3 years and 1 week. In federal employment, the 3-year mark is important. So when I left, I had an opportunity to get an extra week. So if I ever wanted to come back, there wouldn't be any doubt that I had crossed that 3-year mark and had that tenure.
Okay. Is that unique to the TSA or Homeland Security, or is that for a lot of government positions?
It is general. It is general in the federal system. They step up. Basically, it's for your vacation days. You get 1 tier for your first 3 years, then the next tier, I think, until year 15 or something, and then after that is your 3rd tier. I think it might also affect pension and whatever. The old system with the civil service retirement system with the 50% pension after 20 years doesn't really exist anymore. After the air traffic controllers were fired in the early 80s, the federal government went to a new system. If you want the CSRS system, I think you have to work for the Postal Service
now. Yeah, I can see them being left behind with like an older system. So
when I was there, some of the air traffic controllers were still under the old system just because they'd been grandfathered in. but the new ones didn't have that system. So it's very much a 401k type system with a tiny pension element.
Hmm. Interesting. So, did you notice any like evolutions in how the airport security worked over the time you were there? Anything that stood out?
Uh, I did. A lot of things evolved. It was one of their emphases was to standardize so that you would have the same experience security wise if you went through Baltimore, Washington, as if you went through Podunk, Kansas. I don't think they ever truly achieved that. I think that's nearly impossible, but they did make a lot of strides toward that. There was, especially at first, a lot of mission focus. A lot of people, it was the aftermath of 9/11. A lot of people felt that we were making a big difference. And so there was a lot of camaraderie. There was a lot of good things in terms of the workplace environment with each other. And there was also a lot of tension when they started the agency. They started it from scratch. They brought a lot of people in from a lot of different places. There was a great deal of tension. A lot of managers just hadn't been properly trained in how to motivate and properly train and correct their personnel. There were a lot of growing pains too.
Yeah, that in the early years there were a lot of changes for sure. So, one more thing about that, was there anything you noticed about um, your time there? Maybe it was like the conduct of a specific person, or just some policy that came through that really bothered you, as far as like digging into someone's personal effects, or their person beyond what you thought was necessary. Anything inappropriate, maybe anything along those lines.
Uh, I didn't witness individuals behaving inappropriately within their scope of uh, the decision-making authority. I did have some questions from time to time about the procedures we were required to fulfill. One really big moment for me, as far as feeling really uncomfortable, was when I wound up searching through Congressman John Lewis's carry-on bag. He had, yeah, he'd come to Erie to give a speech at the Warner Theater, I think it was, for I think MLK Day. I don't remember specifically, but he was speaking, and then he was flying out, and it was very difficult to see through his bag. At that point, we still had a very antiquated X-ray machine. It didn't have a lot of detail on it, and he had a lot of coins in the bottom of his bag. So it was difficult to make everything out. So I wound up, pulling him aside and going through his carry-on bag to make sure that there was nothing prohibited in it. And I just found it very odd to be a member of the executive branch exercising that kind of search authority over an elected official of the legislative branch. I thought that there were some very uncomfortable lines being crossed there.
Yeah, that's funny. I wouldn't have even thought of that, but now that you mention it, that it does seem like there's some potential for abuse there. Like I'm wondering if that's ever been used in the modern era. Like I'm sure it has. It's just a question of like how widespread or how problematic it would have been. Well,
I
modern era
yeah,
as in recently.
what's that?
Modern era as in like recently, within the past few years.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I left there in 2005.
Right. So, would you say at this point, like during the time that you worked there, or maybe immediately afterwards, were you starting to like lean libertarian, or were you like not there at all? Like, where were you politically at that point?
I had always been suspicious of government authority. After I really, if it hadn't been for 9/11, I probably wouldn't have even been comfortable in that position or have gone for that position. And seeing the way decisions that you hear about on the news are implemented in practice really informed me as I went on to get my degrees in intelligence studies and organizational leadership about why things are structured certain ways, and how things operate and how decisions are made. And then looking at how the person on the ground who has to implement them, how they think, and what kind of dysfunctions that's going to lead to. Give you an example. When you're in a bureaucracy like that, especially a high control, high power distance environment like security, where you're literally afraid of airplanes becoming fireballs if something screws up. When you make a decision, your decision is going to be based on what does procedure say, and if there's any room for judgment. If I take course A and I'm wrong, how grass is my ass? If I take course B and I'm wrong, how grass is my ass? There's almost never going to be an upside for being right. It's just nothing bad happens. So the question is, which course of action, if I'm wrong, is most likely to turn my ass to grass, or will turn my ass to more grass? And when you see that's the decision making process that you have to essentially survive in a bureaucratic environment like that, you start to be able to predict people's behaviors. And then you see politicians talking on television, and you say, oh, he's never been in this environment. He has no idea how what he's saying is going to be implemented.
So is that a term that they use as far as the grass?
No, it's just the term that I've found is very efficient at explaining the mindset of people.
Fair enough. What led you into your career as an intelligence analyst?
I saw a lot of dysfunctions in the decision-making process at various levels. There was a point where I was speaking with a person, and it dawned on me the reason he made decisions. He was several levels above me that I didn't understand. I suddenly understood them. It was that he didn't care about public safety so much as if he could be blamed if something went wrong. And so that's Venn diagram of those two decision making models is nearly perfect overlap, but there are moments where there are important moments where there's going to be divergence. So I saw the dysfunction, and I wanted to be able to be someone who had a say in the dysfunction, an ability to help correct it. So I started looking for opportunities, and our local one of our local universities, Mercyhurst, had an intelligence studies program. I figured if I got a degree in intelligence studies, I could come back to federal service and get into management.
Yeah, so you raise an interesting point though, because I mean I have somewhat of a technical background myself, and I really couldn't tell you what an intelligence analyst was. Excuse me. So can you describe to everyone what that is?
The most effective way I've found to describe it is if you think of all your favorite Jack Ryan films, and then you think of all of the scenes that were too boring to be left in the movie. That's what the intelligence analyst does. It's the guy sitting in the cubicle under the fluorescent lights, going through the chat transcripts and the databases and the pivot tables and the satellite photos, trying to put all the pieces together to figure out which doors Jack Ryan needs to kick down, or
Gotcha.
where Jack Ryan's manager needs to put more resources and have 10 more Jack Ryans in the field.
So basically, they take a lot of information and they distill it into something, more useful, more compact, something that stands out.
Yeah, turning raw data into something actionable is
Right.
another way to think of it.
Gotcha. So, like, would it be similar to like a business analyst, just in a different field? Like, they
Uh,
take a lot of raw data on for like businesses and make it something actionable.
Similar, yeah. And in fact, there a lot of data mining and data analysis has started to get into the field.
Hmm.
The one example that I can give you is last year, around this time, I contracted COVID. This is actually one of the reasons I wound up running. When I went to our local ER to get an antibody treatment, I was denied treatment. That was a very weird thing, and my vitals lessened or worsened overnight. So the next day, I went to Ohio. I got the treatment at a drive-through clinic, and my vitals reversed course overnight. I'm pretty sure that treatment saved my life, but I was denied it in Pennsylvania, and this infuriated me because I had a support system. I grew up in Ohio. I have family from Ohio. I was able to find this clinic. I was able to get there. I was able to get this treatment. So I started digging into it. I found a database online of infusion centers that were offering antibody treatments. I found memos from big healthcare corporations. I found a lot of information online, and when I went through it, when I started making my charts and comparing the availability of clinics to population centers and comparing Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York, what I found is that here in Western Pennsylvania, and that's all I looked at, I don't know if it's statewide or just in this half of the state, we seem to have less access to antibody treatment centers, fewer of them per population area than right across the border in Ohio. I also found that the treatment I got in Ohio was a later generation than what was being administered here in Pennsylvania. So it was more advanced and easier to administer. And I found that our treatments were rationed. I found a corporate memo indicating that there was a supply shortage leading to rationing of our treatments. My conclusion from that is that there is some policy in Pennsylvania that caused a shortage of antibody treatments, or a policy in Ohio that prevented a shortage of antibody treatments. Whatever it was, there is a difference in state policy because the only difference is the political boundary that led to a discrepancy in treatment access for people on one side of this political line versus people on the other side.
Wow. When did you look at all this?
I had COVID late last October. I got into the database and took my data from that in November, and I put it into a report in December. I did my
Okay.
analysis, figured out my questions. I can't find, maybe there were oversight hearings and they found the problem and fixed it, but I can't find evidence of it.
Okay. So were you a libertarian at that point when all that happened, or is that that's what kicked off the light bulb and you were like, what's going on?
I've been a small L libertarian for a long time. I officially joined the party in early this year, with the Mises Caucus push. The whole COVID regime has really pulled me off the sidelines. But I was upset about the nursing home order, and then a year later to see that there's another issue. We're ordered to lock in our homes. We're ordered to shut down our businesses. They're arresting people who try to make the money to feed their families. They're printing money like crazy, and it's all supposedly to save grandma, to save the vulnerable from these issues. And then they make essentially the same mistake 2 years in a row,
Yeah. Some
exposing
lessons haven't been learned.
exposing vulnerable people to the issue that we're supposedly all destroying our lives to protect them from.
hmm So, well, there's the line of joining the party, and then there's the line of running for office. So, was there another tipping point that led you to run for office, or did it arise some other way?
Joseph Van Wagner reached out to me on Signal, and I said, okay, I'll look into it, and I'll do it because something needs to be done. And I figured I'd be a paper candidate first. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized I just need to get out there and talk to people and get this message out there.
Oh, no way. I had no idea it was because Joe reached out to you.
Yeah, I had never really ever seriously considered running for office, and I was foolish enough to believe him when he said, "Hey, you can put as little time into it as you want." So,
Well, he wasn't lying, but sometimes like once you actually get on the ballot, it starts to sink in. Like I could actually do something here.
right.
Yeah, but that's really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, I've been working with him in one capacity or another since 2016. So yeah, I've known him for a little while too. Not quite as long as Peter. That's another story. So, oh, that's really cool. So, when did you kick that off? Like, when did you decide to run?
Uh, when I don't even know the date, but he contacted me on Signal, and he said you can put as much or as little time and energy into it as you want, and I said, well, shoot, there goes my excuse, so I guess I will. And then I started getting into it, and I started knocking on doors, and I realized, okay, there's a message here for people to hear, and so I took it a lot more seriously than I expected to.
Oh, that's awesome. So, well, before we get into like what you've been doing with your campaign, what would you say are your top issues?
That's a great question. The As I've looked back on my campaign recently, I realized my big common theme is fixing policies that are killing Pennsylvanians. There's the COVID story, there's the nursing home concern, but I realized our dispensary system is I think that in the movement we've been thinking of it wrong. We've been thinking of it as nullifying drug laws, but I think it's more about healthcare sanctuary. It's about when you look at the FDA's abuses that create overpriced drugs, where you have three bioidentical insulin producers that are essentially a cartel. They have no competition, even though their drugs are largely off patent. I mean, we can talk about the patent ladder and abuses of that system there, but are versions of their drugs that that the patents have expired, but there isn't competition on the market because the FDA makes it so expensive to for competitors to get approved. And that's regulatory capture. That's a captured regulator coddling corporate profits. So what I'm looking at is what are off-patent medications that Pennsylvanians are buying at an extraordinary markup only because the FDA won't allow competition. Think about remember when everyone was upset because Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro, drove the price of Daraprim up through the roof. Daraprim was an off-patent medication. It's 80 years old. The patent expired before anyone we know was born. He was able to do that because he had an FDA license that granted him a perpetual monopoly. I looked into the Constitution, the clause in the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, that creates patent power for Congress states limited time. If your protection for this property it isn't for a limited time, it's not covered under the patent clause, and therefore it's not an enumerated power. So I think if you have an unenumerated power and the state asserts, hey, we have a 10th Amendment right to get this to our market, to approve this for our market, I think that's a really powerful legal claim for this is what the 10th Amendment is good for. If the 10th Amendment isn't good for, hey, that power isn't enumerated, so the states have it, and we have this rate that we can prove that because we're using our Department of Health to get EpiPens or Daraprim or insulin competition onto the shelves of our cannabis dispensaries. If the 10th Amendment isn't good for that, then what the hell is it good for?
Well, that's a great question. Subject for another podcast, but yes, in short, the federal government should be doing a lot less than they are right now.
And we're not going to get them to, you don't, the nature of power is you don't get an agency, a bureaucracy, an entity to voluntarily give it up. You have to get another agency, another bureaucracy, another entity that's smaller and less powerful to seize their chunk of it. And if you get 50 laboratories of democracy seizing that chunk from the FDA, then this crony corporatism that's making medicine unaffordable even after its patent has expired dies.
So, are you talking about like a sanctuary city type concept, but for like those kinds of drugs? Is that what you're saying?
I'm talking about putting EpiPens on the shelves in the cannabis dispensaries.
Oh, okay. So, so existing cannabis dispensaries.
You have to work with the industry, but
Hmm.
the system is proven. And if you look at the way the cannabis dispensary system works in Pennsylvania, I haven't been to Colorado or California, but I understand that they have bud tenders pulling buds out, pulling nuggets out of glass jars to put people's orders together. In Pennsylvania, it's not like that. In Pennsylvania, you get sealed containers from the manufacturer.
Well, that all might be changing soon. You seen the recent news from Biden?
I haven't. What was that?
Supposedly, there's going to be a significant push from his administration to reclassify marijuana so it would no longer be Schedule 1.
That's interesting. I'd be interested to see how that works.
Yeah, he's also pairing it with supposedly, again, who knows how it's actually going to work out in practice, releasing non-violent offenders who were charged on a federal level with marijuana possession.
If the policy is what it sounds like, my only criticism is why the hell did it take him 2 years?
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother question, but
here's my understanding about rescheduling cannabis is that the thing that's been holding it up has been argument between the Democrats and Republicans over how the tax money should be spent and whether it should be diverted to things like get out the vote efforts.
Well, in a sense, it is that, because it seems to me like a desperate attempt to gain some semblance of support back for Biden before the midterms, or at least for his party. But maybe for him in a longer term, but also for his party, because he in particular, in terms of his approval ratings, have been suffering, but his party's been doing a little better, at least compared to how you would think they'd be doing.
I got curious about something, so I did some research last month. The Controlled Substances Act specifically exempts alcohol and tobacco. They would both be Schedule 1 substances if they weren't exempted from the CSO.
Yeah, that's fine.
And the way it exempts them, I read that portion of the statute just to clarify. The way it exempts them is that it exempts anything that meets certain definitions that are in the Tax Reform Act of 1986 as amended. So if you wanted to exempt cannabis from scheduling and just make it as legal as alcohol, all you have to do is amend the definition of, say, malt liquor in the federal tax code to include cannabis. And then by law, it would be malt liquor or whiskey or wine or beer or anything. But any alcohol or tobacco substance that has a specific definition in the 1986 tax code as it's amended today, if you amend it again to change one of those definitions to include cannabis, cannabis will automatically be exempted from the Controlled Substances Act and treated and taxed exactly like whatever you amended that definition to put it into.
Wow. So, yeah, I'll be curious to see how he does that, or if he can do that. even his student debt cancellation, I've heard, is possibly going to be blocked because of lawsuits. So we'll see. But I was thinking in terms of the effect that this would have on what you're proposing, because that would mean that there'd be a lot less regulations and legal difficulties with dispensaries. Because, in all likelihood, Pennsylvania might follow suit and push some of the regulatory burden away from marijuana distribution even more if they're going to follow his lead.
Maybe we'll see what Pennsylvania does. Remember, again, the state has regulatory authority, right? The biggest difference with him, with if cannabis becomes descheduled or becomes exempt from Schedule 1 or becomes rescheduled, then cannabis will be then the biggest difference that you're going to see overnight is access to capital markets. Right now, your cannabis manufacturers need to either be privately held or be traded on the Canadian stock exchanges. And what that does is it thins their float so that hedge funds can manipulate them more easily. You're going to have a massive explosion in the trading multiples of your multi-state operators that are listed on those exchanges, because they're suddenly going to be far more available and tradable in the United States, and a flood of capital is going to go after them. They're going to be less subject to manipulation by hedge funds.
Isn't capitalism wonderful? It's like as soon as something like this, as soon as the opportunity presents itself, boom. It's just like, there's immediately, there's immediately more. Well, the demand was always there, but now the supply is going to rush to meet it.
Yeah. There is going to be manipulation. There always is, but it'll require much bigger players, much more sophisticated. It won't be as blatant as it is now.
Right. Are you familiar with Dan Berman?
Never heard the name.
Okay, you should look him up because he talks about this issue a lot. He was running for, I don't know if he's done it more than once, but in the last cycle, he ran for the Libertarian nomination. I don't know if I should say what he does on the air. I'm not sure if he's talked about it. But let's just say he has his own effort that's currently underway to get less expensive medications. I can tell you off air, but he's definitely spent a lot of time talking about that issue.
Cool. Yeah. So we have a sliding scale medical clinic here in town. It does a lot of really good work. It helps a lot of people who wouldn't be able to help otherwise. But if you had Pennsylvania manufactured insulin sold in Pennsylvania dispensaries, you wouldn't just be creating decent jobs for Pennsylvanians. You'd also be keeping money in the patient's pockets, or in the case of those who are getting assistance, public or private, and they're paying those sliding scale prices. That's if you take a $400 insulin product and you drive its price down to $40, that's $360 that's going into that sliding scale price, whether through a discount from the clinic or through a public foundations grant or through public assistance that is still available to provide assistance to other people.
Okay. And before we move on to,
if you are paying out of pocket, if you don't have insurance, and there's a place that you can go for these off-patent medications that's going to be affordable out of pocket, then that's competition that actually winds up driving down the price that insurance winds up paying for the other stuff, because they now have to compete.
Right. Now, before we move on, I want to ask you, like, as state representative, assuming you're elected, what can you do to advance this?
We need to get a deal between the parties involved. Right now, in the dispensary system, you have two major groups. You have your multi-state operators who have access to the Canadian financial markets. They're vertically integrated. They're operating in many states. They're big behemoths. essentially, or at least they feel like it, to the Pennsylvania specific operators. They're local producers, they're local sellers. They don't have the same diversity of product and customer. If we created, right now, they're getting, they're under a lot of pressure, and they're pushing for equitable relief, is the phrase they're using, from the legislature. They're pushing for the legislature to change the law to give them, excuse me, to make up for their disadvantages in the market. Obviously the MSOs aren't very happy about that. So what I'm looking at here is if we could amend the Pennsylvania specific operators licenses so that they're the ones licensed to produce these things, then that gives them the equitable relief they're looking for. It diversifies their customer base, their product line, without cutting into the business of the multi-state operators. So the people who would otherwise be blocking the deal are now going to be in favor of it. In terms of my specific district, we are what's called the flagship opportunity zone, the Erie flagship opportunity zone.com. You can look it up. We are the largest opportunity zone in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of industrial facilities that have fallen into disrepair and disuse and are in this opportunity zone. You could get opportunity zone funds. My goal, I've spoken with a manager of an opportunity zone fund in Columbus last week. You can get opportunity zone funds if you have the right, if they're confident in the management and the experience and the licensing of the people involved. They'll put up the money to get it started. They'll retrofit the factory, supply the equipment, they'll get the startup capital for the actual business, and they'll take a piece of the ownership. But we can get our struggling Pennsylvania specific operators into a new business line with little to no startup capital of their own. And do it by creating jobs in the hardest hit, most economically disadvantaged areas of this district.
Yeah, like I'm just thinking about what free trade zones have accomplished in other countries, and even though you would think we don't have a whole lot of regulations here, at least to an outside observer, well, it doesn't quite end up that way, especially since I just happened to be doing some reading recently, so I didn't even realize, but it turns out Pennsylvania is technically considered a border state with Canada because of the lake. So if you cross the lake, it's an international border. Now, I know when I went up to Michigan, they talked about how there was a lot of shipping from the Canadian side of the lake over to the Midwestern states, particularly along Lake Superior. I don't know if that's as much true with Lake Erie, but I could certainly see, Erie itself being a hub for that kind of trade.
I hadn't even thought much about that. Now, this district does go right up to the Canadian border in the middle of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
We're on the shore and it extends out that far. I hadn't even thought about Canada. My focus for this, because the pharmaceutical companies are going to despise this, but right now their pockets are so flush from COVID and they're so fat and happy, this might be the time to make the move. That's why initially I focused on epinephrine, was I thought insulin was too ambitious, but then Gavin Newsom made his announcement now, so I think now California is going to be fighting a lot of the legal battles, and we can piggyback off that.
Yeah, well, they're still probably trying to develop a new vaccine or convince people to get their 5th booster or something. They probably aren't focusing much on other things.
Right. So what my focus has been on keeping everything within our state borders, just to make sure that it is there it's protected under the 10th Amendment. Nobody can make some kind of BS Commerce Clause claim to shut it down. Now, I looked at the 18th and 21st Amendments, enacting prohibition and then repealing it. And the 21st Amendment, interestingly, prohibits importation of alcohol from one state to another.
Yeah, that's the Volstead Act, I thought.
Now, the Volstead Act, the 18th Amendment allowed for the criminalization of what it called intoxicating liquors. And the Volstead Act was the law that was passed later that put that into action.
Oh, okay.
The 21st Amendment repealed prohibition, but one of its big claims, one of its stipulations was to prohibit the importation of alcohol across state lines. And I think Mississippi did not allow public bars until like 1968, to give one example. There were states that continued prohibition even after federal prohibition was repealed by the 21st Amendment. And that's the reason that line was in the 21st, was so that that could work. But the reason this caught my attention and the reason I'm bringing it up is you can ship alcohol across state lines. You can carry alcohol across state lines. There just has to be a bilateral agreement between the origination state and the ending state, and you can't use a federal service like the Postal Service. But you can use UPS or FedEx as long as your state has an agreement with that other state that substance, that whether it's a hard cider or a liquor or a beer or a wine, that can be transferred between them. So even though the Constitution prohibits it, the Constitution doesn't apply to bilateral agreements between the states.
Right. Huh.
So if you prove the concept in Pennsylvania, theoretically, a bilateral agreement between Ohio and Pennsylvania could expand markets. And you could have, say, an EpiPen facility in Ohio, an insulin facility in Pennsylvania, and they would both be serving both markets.
Well, I definitely hope we get this episode out there. If you have other ways that you've wrote all this up or conveyed it somehow, all these ideas, because I'm sure the people of Erie and across the state would love to hear them.
I will have to do a better job of writing them up. I do have a 90-second video pinned on my Twitter feed.
Yeah, I think I saw that. That was the one where you had the ad, and then you were speaking in the corner, right?
Yes.
Okay, that one I saw.
So yes, my very poor digital editing skills.
Well, not everyone's an expert in everything. But I want to make sure we get to other topics, though. Like, what else are your big issues?
Defend the guard, of course. I when I was gathering signatures, I had a guy. I told him about that, and he told me the story of his sister, who signed up to become an air traffic controller, and wound up spending, I think, a year or two in Iraq.
I can't even imagine how that would work.
My question is, how many crises have we had here in Pennsylvania that we haven't had the proper National Guard response or availability to address? Because they've been stretched so thin fighting an overseas conflict.
Yeah, I have not seen anything one way or the other on this, but I hope that there were no Florida National Guard troops deployed anywhere else.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I know that for Katrina, I believe it was, the Louisiana National Guard was gone. I know there was some instance like that where there was like a natural disaster that hit their home state, and it was like maybe the PA or New Jersey National Guard had to be sent down because the Louisiana National Guard was sent away, something like that. Like, it's definitely happened before.
I remember a story, I think it was Katrina, where Mexico actually sent troops for assistance on the U.S. side of the border.
Yeah, well, Defend the Guard would definitely address that. So, I mean, I've talked with other candidates that support that as well. In fact, I think it's been so widely praised that I think all of our candidates just about have adopted it, and I have yet to hear that from any candidate from any other party. So We're definitely leading the charge on that. Love to see it.
One thing that we should probably, as I've been going through this, I've been looking at all of the ways that we need a more robust ecosystem for future candidates and races. And I think one of the things we need to do is develop an archive of people telling their stories of being deployed overseas when they were supposed to be National Guard, of not getting help they needed, of having to scramble to make up for the fact that a Guard unit isn't available to respond to a disaster or a crisis here in Pennsylvania. We need to do a better job of having at our fingertips the personal stories of how the the abuse of the Guard units by the federal government is really impacting the state of Pennsylvania, really impacting the Guard members and their families, and really impacting a readiness for crises and disasters.
Right. That I think I might actually be able to help with a little bit. So, but to quickly define it to our audience, I just want to make sure I'm not losing anyone. So defend the Guard. That means that you can't deploy your state's National Guard units without an official declaration of war outside of the state that they're from. So the Pennsylvania National Guard can't go outside of Pennsylvania. New Jersey National Guard can't leave New Jersey, and so on and so forth. But as far as the second half of that goes, like conveying defend the Guard, if you go to the Twitter page for the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, I believe it's still their pinned tweet is a video explaining defend the Guard. So definitely take a look at that later. I don't know I don't think that it's too short to cover personal stories. Maybe if they did a follow-up, they could definitely get into that. But if you're going to share with anyone, like what is it? Just show them that. Because they did a really good job with it. It's well done.
Thank you. I'll retweet that after this.
Yeah, definitely take a look.
The other thing that I really want to emphasize is oversight. Our politicians would rather build a bridge than maintain a bridge. They look for the glitzy, glamorous things, and they're not interested in doing the hard work of making government work. Years ago, I had a business partner, and we had a company that made software that found meth labs. And we designed our business model. We designed our sales model around the fact that the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act created billions upon billions of dollars for municipal law enforcement to purchase equipment and services for counter meth enforcement. But when we started showing them, pointing them to where to look for the grants to get the software to afford our software system, they weren't getting the money. It wasn't coming through, and it was really weird the way it was happening. So, this is one of the ways that I learned about the dysfunctions in contracting and in merchandising in the federal system. So you need to have somebody. It's almost like a chapter out of Ayn Rand, where she talks about how everyone has to know somebody, and you have to have a guy who knows a guy in the Capitol. And so we knew someone. We had an associate who had some contacts and started making some phone calls. And what we were told is that apparently it's a fairly common practice, at least in the federal system, that a politician will get funding into a bill, an appropriation funding, $100 billion for this, $20 million for that, get his press release, get his photo opportunity, etc. But then when it comes time to actually cut the check, the money gets spent on something else. And somebody else gets their relationship, their press release, their photo op, whatever. And then when the people that the money was actually set aside for go looking for it, it's not there. This is This is a function of oversight, making sure that money is spent on what it's supposed to be spent on. You pass a law saying this money will be spent on this. It's a function of oversight to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, I wish I could say that that was unusual or I was surprised, but it doesn't. I guess that kind of thing doesn't surprise me anymore.
It shocked me. I just had this series of moments seeing how the practice of state power differs from the theory and the promise that have kind of shifted my perspective over time.
Uh-huh. So were there any other issues that you wanted to talk about, like some things that are the top issues for your campaign?
I think we've discussed most of them. I really want to bring attention to have been in recent years listed as, in my district, having the poorest zip code in Pennsylvania. There's a little bit of controversy.
Again?
The poorest zip code in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
There's a little bit of controversy about the listing, but there are a lot of people who are hurting here. I told you the sliding scale medical center that's in the district. We're kind of a forgotten corner of the state. You mentioned that in your opening here when you were talking about you don't hear a lot from the western half of the state, but you also don't hear a lot from Erie. We're the fourth or fifth largest city in the state, and we're this tiny blue dot in a sea of red rural area in the rest of the county. It's an interesting combination. But when our representatives go to Harrisburg and they're fighting to represent our interests, if you look at, say, Philadelphia, how many representatives are there from Bucks County and all of the surrounding counties that are part of the Philadelphia's really big metropolitan area?
A lot.
And if they had an option of passing or repealing a regulation that would divert economic development in Pennsylvania just over the border to New Jersey, their constituents would still benefit because a lot of their people would commute there for work. Whereas if that rule were to divert economic development to this lonely, remote corner of the state on the lake, they'd be a lot less likely to do that. It's a really weird thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. But if you just look at a map of how representation works in the state, and you think about it in terms of economic centers, places like Philadelphia, like Harrisburg, more Philadelphia would gladly ship power or dollars or trade agreements, or when they go to Washington to lobby for which way a road should go, they would gladly send that across the state line rather than over here. And our representatives have this attitude, at least it appears, that as long as they bring back 250,000 for the fire department, or this money for traffic lights, that they're doing a good job. And it's we need someone who thinks comprehensively about ways, instead of taking from the state treasury, ways to develop the economy and to actually strike deals with the people in big centers of political power like uh, Philadelphia, that they'll be okay with letting that power flow to the other remoter regions of the state.
It's funny you say that because I'd have to double check to be sure where the funding comes from, but I'm pretty sure this is already happening. Have you ever ridden or heard of SEPTA?
Rings a bell.
It's in the name, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority. So it's not in New Jersey. I mean, maybe they operate in New Jersey as well in some limited capacity, but the gist of it is it's, regional rail, buses, trolleys, subways in and just outside Philadelphia. And I mean, I wrote it for years, and I remember doing some research on it at the time. So it's a possibility that I'm off. I'm pretty sure it's correct. The rest of the state funds it because they've been running at a deficit for who knows how long, just like every other public transit system almost on the planet. But I mean, it's exactly what you described, and it's actually happening. So there you go. Maybe that's another thing you can bring attention to.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so we have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure we could circle back to what you've been doing with your campaign so far. So you mentioned the video ad, you mentioned knocking on doors. Maybe you can expand on both of those a little bit, or talk about other things that you've been working on.
Sure. So I have been knocking on a lot of doors, talking to a lot of people, passing out palm cards. It's low dollar, high shoe leather, essentially campaign strategy. I could really use volunteers. If anyone out there is in the area and likes what they're hearing, please contact us on the website or on social media. I could use some volunteers to help meet people. I've gone to some events, some festivals, spoken to people there. With the social media ad, and I what I've been experimenting with is trying to reach more people online, trying to get more people than what I can get knocking on doors or shaking hands at festivals. And I think that's shown some real promise. I'm going to be making some more ads. Things are just really have been really hectic the past couple of weeks, but I want to get these little introductions, these little statements, 30 to 90 seconds to give people overviews, give them ideas, get them engaged. And if anyone out there could share these things in their socials, that would be a big help. I'm always looking for folks who are willing to help with communication, with messaging, with just uh, if you can't, if you want to help and you can't do any of that, my website accepts donations. We could always get. It'd be great to get a mailing out. We now have signs. We finally got the stakes in for the signs. They came today. So anyone that wants a sign for their yard, let me know.
So what is your website?
mgt4pa.com.
All right, and I see that's your Twitter tag there. Do you have a separate Facebook with like a different name on it?
But my Facebook page is the same, so is my Instagram. I even started a Truth Social. That is largely dead. I can't find a lot of people in Erie who are on that. So mostly I've been engaging with Twitter, which is weird because it's a
well, that's good. You're doing more than most candidates running at the state rep level that I know of. Maybe more than any other candidates in Pennsylvania that are currently running. Don't hold me to that, but that's just the most I've heard so far. So I want to get to an audience question.
We have an audience.
You might have met him. What is Erie's climate like for libertarianism?
Erie right now has the in terms of the general ethic, most people anywhere in this country are going to think of themselves as small L libertarian until they think there should be a law about something. In terms of our party, we're really in a rebuilding phase right now. We have had some people have left the party. A lot of people have become disengaged. They're still in the party technically, but they're not. They haven't been engaged in a while. With the Mises takeover and the Keystone, a lot of people are hanging back and waiting to see how things shake out. They're not sure what's going on or which perspective they feel is more accurate. And so they're waiting to see how things shake out. So what we're trying to do, and it's very difficult because there's very few of us who are active right now, is get up some energy, get some passion going. Right now, we're trying to plan a bring your own beverage porch party type social gathering, not a party meeting. Not people drinking coffee and complaining about roads, but just a social culture jam, low key. Come meet people who are interested in human flourishing and liberty, and find ways that we can promote it while listening to music or something.
Well, you definitely need those things. You need the business and the social side, but some people leave out the social side. So it's important that you're getting into that. That's good to see. And for what it's worth, for almost the entire time I've been involved, as far as I know, there's only ever one person involved in Erie in any capacity. So, but, even just with you and Peter being there, you're already like twice as big as you were for the time I've been around. So it's a start. Just keep up that growth and you'll be good. You'll be more people than the entire city in a decade or two.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the great question, Morgan.
Right. So I'll just say one more thing before we take off. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
I think that we covered the biggies. I really want oversight. I think that we have a tremendous opportunity. We've built a tremendous sausage casing of medical sanctuary with our dispensary system. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to see what other kind of meats we can stuff into it. And I think that we have a lot of support for Defend the Guard. At least when people hear about it, they support it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It still amazes me. Like, politicians are one thing, at least your average politician. But when people hear about Defend the Guard, like real people, I can't think of very many people that are really against it. Once you actually explain it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
what I can say is something else I'd like to say for everyone, all of the liberty-minded folks in the rest of the state of Pennsylvania. Erie is a beautiful tourist town and college town right on a tremendous Great Lake. We have the most visited state park in Pennsylvania. It has, I think, a dozen beaches. And my district here has a number of microbreweries and microdistilleries. We have a very thriving brewing culture. So stop up for your next vacation.
Yeah, I've never been up there, but Peter's already invited me up. So hopefully I'll be able to make a trip over sometime soon. We'll be able to meet up too.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thanks, Michael. Stick around. I'm going to kick you out, but we'll talk offline. I just want to wrap up for the show. So I'll talk to you in a minute. Bye. All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. So just a reminder, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, but I'll do a special Sunday night edition of Take Human Action PA. We're going to be interviewing Autumn Pangaea, another state rep candidate. Mises endorsed. Russ Sylvester has also been endorsed. We'll have him on at some point. I anticipate there'll be more endorsed candidates coming up. So we're going to try to spend the month of October making sure we cover all of them. We'll see how it goes. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in and have a good night. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share.